Alright, I'm with Garnie Boyd, and we're talking about the fishery on Belleisle Bay, which Garnie took part in years ago. So, I guess, Garnie, I'll just start out by asking you, how old were you when you started
Oh,
fishing with your father and brother?
I suppose I would be 8 or 10 years old when I first started going out. Just a kid walking around behind them on the ice and helping them. Not helping them much. I was just there. But then as I got older, they expected me to go to work. Then expected me to go to work, so I had to start helping then. And like after I was in my teens, mid-teens, I would be out helping them and then I get buying some nets of my own as I get older and did some fishing too.
So that fishery, that was going long before you started though.
Oh yes, yes. I asked somebody the other day, wondering how long it's been going. They said they thought it was going at least since 1930.
Oh, since the 30s.
Yeah.
And you told me that when you went out there, like there were a lot of people doing it.
Oh yeah, a lot, yeah.
The ice was just black with
Yeah,
people
yeah,
out there fishing.
yeah.
And
And you had to, when you set a net, you had to take a fir tree or a cedar tree out of a 6 foot high tree and cut a hole in the ice and get it froze in so people walking could see that they knew there was a fish hole handy.
okay.
Yeah.
Now how did you put the nets in? Can you explain that? How you got the net under the ice?
Well, yeah, we'd cut a hole, what we call the fish hole. It would probably be 2.5, 3 feet long and probably 1.5 feet wide. And we'd get a long cedar running pole, because cedar floated good, and get as long a pole as you could get, probably 20 feet or 25 feet. And you'd take a crotchet stick with the crotch down on it, and always got a stick that had a couple of limbs you could cut off to make it so you could put the crotch down over the cedar pole. You tie your running line, your rope to the cedar pole, and then you push it in, and then you would shove it under the ice. And when you got the pole in, except for the last 1.5 feet, 2 feet, you take the crotch stick and you knew where you were straight, and you'd be heading it for across the bay, like. And if you pushed the back end of the pole, and somebody else would be at the other end, they could hear the pole tapping the ice, so we knew where to cut the next hole. And then we'd cut another hole, but no, it wasn't as big as the fish hole, just a hole probably 6 inches by 6 inches or something like that. And then push the pole on out and then you do the same thing again, and you'd get the pole past that hole, and about a foot of it's behind you, and you could tap the ice. You'd probably have to do that 5 times to get because the nets would run, I think they would run pretty close to probably 100 feet
No,
long.
Quite a length.
Yeah, so if you had a 20, well, you get lengths, different nets too, or nets could be different lengths, and you'd probably, maybe it wouldn't be over 60 or 80 feet, but sitting here thinking about it, you sort of forget exactly, but you would do that, and then at the far end, when it come time you're going to pull the pole out, you had to cut it along the hole, like quite wide, maybe a foot wide and 3 feet long, so the pole would come up easy out of the water, and you'd catch that with your crotch again. You'd get that and bring it up, yeah.
And then you put the net on the rope and pull it.
And pull the net in, yeah.
Pull the net in around.
Yeah.
How deep a net? What was the?
Well, we have set nets 5 feet deep and some 25 feet.
Oh,
It all depends how much water you was in. If you're going to be handy to the shore someplace, you wouldn't want it much over a 5 foot net. But if you're out in the deeper water, then if you had a 25-foot net, it would catch more fish.
So how many nets would you put out so that you could tend?
Well, we'd have probably, between my father and I and my brother, he fished some, but he didn't fish a lot with us, but he would some. We probably have 10 nets.
So quite a few.
Yeah. And
how often did you check them?
well, it all depends. Sometimes they could go for a week, and you wouldn't, if there was no fish moving, you wouldn't probably check them once a week. But if there was fish going, you check them every day or every other day.
Okay, so what made the fish move? Did you know, or
Didn't know. It just seemed
happened.
they said it'd be a run. It seemed like once somebody got a pretty good haul of fish, then everybody would seem to get some fish.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we made any money at it or not, but we thought we was anyway. And it was just another way of getting a few dollars to buy, have some money coming in.
So how many fish would you get over a winter?
Well, that's a hard question to answer because every winter would be different.
Yeah.
Yeah, some winters you'd make much more money in your pocket if you never went out even. But then other winters you do pretty good. So
Yeah.
I don't know. We used to box them up in Hayes and Urquhart down lower cars used to make fish boxes, and a fish box would be probably 16 inches wide and a foot deep and maybe 30 inches long, and they'd hold, I would say, about 100 pounds of fish you get into them.
Okay.
And when you pack these fish in the boxes, you'd have to have lots of ice, and you put a layer of ice and a layer of fish and ice and fish.
Yeah.
And it was, and how they found the market for these fish, I don't know that one, because that's before my time, but used to ship them to New York, the Fulton Fish Market. And there was a company up there by the name of Caleb Haley, and they would send, in the fall of the year, they'd send a bunch of tags to the fishermen, and so you put them on your boxes when you take them over. We used to ship them by rail in Norton, and they go by rail and to New York, and they would be preserved. They never got bad ones. The ice on in the cold weather, of course, in the wintertime would be frozen likely. And but then there was another company got a hold of my father. Somehow they got his name off the Caleb Haley box, and by the name of Wilson's Fish. Because Fulton Fish Market would have a whole lot of different fish stalls, different businesses in there selling fish. So Wilson called, and he wanted to get our fish, and he offered a bit more money at that time, and so we switched and we sent to Wilson's, and then, but we still sent some to Caleb Haley too. But
do you remember how much they would pay per pound at that time?
well, I can't, Richard. It's I can't really, to be honest. I think, well, a lot of people used to peddle them. You'd catch them, and then you'd head through the country, and you'd sell them in like you'd sell a 4-pound bass for a couple of dollars likely.
So they're fairly cheap.
Yeah, they're fairly cheap, but that would save the having to have a fish box and save a lot of whatever you got then was money in your pocket.
Yeah.
And
so these were all striped bass.
all striped bass, yeah.
You didn't catch any other types of fish.
Well, if you caught a salmon, we had to have a license. Every net had to have a license on it, and the fish warden would be out there when we'd be out fishing. And one fish warden was a nice fellow, and in fact, in my time, he was about the only one I remember working with because, I'm on the younger generation for fishing bass.
Yeah.
Most of the fellows that fished was older than I was, but my father and my grandfather fished, and I just grew into it. But my generation would be the last generation that did bass fishing.
Yeah.
And but the fish warden would say, if you get a salmon, he's to go back in. But he said, now if you get a salmon, because sometimes the fish would be dead when you bring them out of the net, he says, there's no point putting the dead salmon back in, but if it's a live one, I want you to put it back in.
Yeah.
And that was nice of him because he could have said every salmon had to go back.
So he was reasonable.
Very reasonable. And once in a while you'd catch a sturgeon in it.
Okay.
And they was an awful thing. They get in the net and you knew if you pulled it out and seen a sturgeon that you was going to have a big hole in your net because they would wrap themselves up in so bad that you couldn't get them out without cutting them out, kind of.
So they were alive, were they, when you caught the sturgeon?
Some would be, but some would be dead over the... A lot of the fish would be alive, but the bass, some of them would be alive, some would be dead.
Do you remember catching any real big ones? Any quite big?
Oh, yeah, when we caught them, you'd catch them up to 50 pounds.
Up to 50?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
Big fish.
And in fact, I think, and I don't like to tell you, seems to me I've heard tell of one person getting one 65 pounds, but I'm not saying that's for sure because, as I say, I was in the last end of the fishing and I heard all the fish stories from before.
Yeah. So, like fish stories, they could have grown a little bit.
That's right, that's right. Now, there was one old guy down here that fished, had always fished, and he had a job with the government running the ferry. In the summertime, then he'd fish and do whatever in the winter. So that's back in the days that when the Conservatives went in, the Liberals would get fired or vice versa. And he was working for the Liberals and the Conservatives went in that fall and so he lost his job. And we went out one morning, he had a whole net full of fish. And he made the comment, he said, the Tories is trying to starve me to death, but the Lord won't let them. Look at the fish they send me.
He took that as an omen.
Yeah. But
so you would start after Christmas, probably?
but just when the ice came in.
Whenever. So it
Whenever.
could be before Christmas.
Oh, and years ago, the ice was safe before Christmas, most generally.
Yeah. And you'd go to March or?
Go to March or just whenever the
water started coming up.
when
the ice
weather got soft and the ice not safe.
Yeah.
We drove vehicles on the ice a lot once you got the ice safe.
Yeah.
And that made it a lot nicer because there's big, you get out there trying to tend nets, there's a lot of walking. And you seem forever to go from one net to another.
Yeah.
But we had, I shouldn't tell this as this was too stupid a thing to tell, but my father had bought an old half-ton for $200, which was back then was, quite a little truck. And it was a nice sheet of ice out there, but 6 or 7 inches, maybe 8 at the most. And we were setting these nets, and he said, I think that old truck would hold that old truck. And so, of course, we always tempted to try it. It was so much easier and it's quicker.
Yeah.
So we put it out we got it on the ice, and she was an old standard transmission, and them old trucks had a throttle as well as a choke.
Yeah. And
you could pull the throttle out, and she had running boards on. You'd stand outside of her. So 4 of us, my brother and I and my father and a man that worked with us, we drove her all over on the ice out there. Nobody in the cab because if she went down, we was going to jump her. And you go by where there would be fishing. Men would be fishing, pulling the net out or pulling it in or something, and the old ice would settle and it'd be about a foot of water would raise out of the hole. And I don't think some of those folks was too happy with us because they thought we was going to drown them along with ourselves. We did that for a while, and then coming into shore, she broke through on us one time, so we had to wait for colder weather and get more ice before we took her out again.
Yeah. So do you have any idea how many people would be out fishing? How many?
Well, everybody always fished at least. There was always 2 people working together.
Yeah.
And I really, it's something hard because the Belleisle's a big piece of ice, and I imagine it'd be 50 likely or more.
So quite a number.
Quite a number, yeah.
Quite a little industry.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. It brought in quite a little bit of money. Now there was one old fellow that used to go out and fish, and he said, I'm talking with the old fellows now, and now I'm the old fellow telling the story. He said, I think, he had a very deep voice. He said, I think there's a hole the Belleisle would have been a better place if people would have had just as much money if they'd never had the fish, because it cost them, for time and what. Now, one was a big leap forward in the fishing. That when I was young, we fished with rayon nets, and they brought out in a couple of years.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, somebody come up with an idea nylon would be better for the nets. And then wasn't long everybody was fishing with nylon, and they would go for a long, long time. You had to sim the nets in the rope. You'd have a rope, and you had you'd have whatever needles you had for people working, simming them. You'd have to sim them in on your net, and the needles would be about 6 inches long, and you may use that for your measurement, and every 6 inches simming a new net on a new rope, then you'd have to tie it off every 6 inches,
top and bottom, or just the
top and bottom, and the whole way around the ends too.
Yeah.
And
that'd be a lot of work on a long net.
Oh, long work. Yeah, I remember in my father's house over there. I suppose it would be 40 feet at least from one end to the other, and from the kitchen through to the living room. And I remember us having nets up, simming them in there because it was nice and warm. You in the wintertime you need to be someplace that was warm. And we used to sim nets in, and you put. In later years, they had floats that you put on, cork floats or little plastic floats. You shove them on the rope, and then you'd work sim and fasten them around. Then on the bottom, there was leads that you could put on to hold it down. And that was in later years, but in my first years of doing it, they used to use cedar blocks a lot to tie. They was never simmed in. They was just tied on the rope. And then some people use glass bottles with a good tight top. Yeah. And then they use just rocks or brick or anything to tie on the bottoms to hold them down.
The bottom put down.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'd go out and you'd have nothing, and sometimes you'd have a good haul.
Yeah.
Just depend.
And when you unhooked your net, because you had to cut your fish hole out and the out hole out every time, because you tied your running line on the end of your out end, and then you'd pull the net back with the line. You'd fasten it to something out there so it wouldn't go down the hole. Yeah. And then you get your net all out and empty the fish out of it. Then you had to haul it back in again.
What did you use in your hands? Be wet, cold work, wouldn't it?
It was funny. If there was fish running, wouldn't matter how cold it was. Your hands never. We used mittens and pullovers. Yeah. And they'd get in the cold water. They'd ice up, and that made them warmer. Okay. And we would. But if there was fish running, you never worried about your hands getting cold. But when there was no fish, it was a cold job. Yeah.
So that fishing industry stopped sometime when?
I'd say it stopped in the early 70s.
Early 70s. And the reason was?
Well, the reason that they give us that bass was picking up too much mercury, because they went out of the fresh water in the summertime and went down along New England shore somewhere. Okay. And they was picking up mercury down there, and they said they wasn't fit for human consumption, so they made us stop fishing.
That was the end of the bass fishing.
That was the end of the bass fishing.
Boy.
Yeah. And for but once a year, but you couldn't always see it, because once the snow come on the ice, you couldn't see what was going on under it. But some years that there was no snow would come on, and there was big bass that did this. They would turn and float up with their white bellies right up against the ice. Yeah. And we'd be out there and with an ice slice cutting the holes out, and one fellow would have the ice slice, another one would have quite a long hook with a handle on it, and you cut through, and then you get down quick with your hook and pull him out, and we get a lot of fish that way. You get that 1 day or 2 days a year.
But they were dead, or they just...
No, they wasn't dead. Just something they did. They float up.
And turn upside down.
Turn upside down. The white bellies would show.
Oh, okay.
And they was good to ship because we shipped them and nobody's condemned them.
Just something they did.
Something they did. But now I have seen, since we stopped fishing bass one summer or one spring, there was a whole bunch of them big bass floated. They did die. This was in this early spring.
Yeah.
And all along the shore there was big bass fish laying dead. And they figured that was the ones that was floating up.
Okay.
Yeah. It's something to do with the change of temperature of from the salt water to the fresh water,
Okay.
they thought.
Put them in a shock. Or
Yeah.
Before we close, you told me a great story about how to get a horse up out of the ice. Your grandfather. Could you tell that story? That was a good story.
Okay, then. When my father and his sister, one Sunday night, was going home from church. They was up to Hatfield's Point to church, and my sister lived down the road here about 5 miles. But years ago, people traveled the ice more than they did the roads, because the roads wouldn't be plowed and the ice would be all level, no hills. And so my father and my aunt, his sister, was going home from church, and down my grandfather, Oscar Brown, he had a point that his house was, his farm went down to the bay. He lived up on the hill quite a ways off the road, but and the ice takes longer to get safe going around where there's a brook hole that brook's floating out, or if there's a point out. And they was going down with the horse, and the horse went through the ice and sleigh, and she and my father got out of the sleigh and got up on the ice, but the horse was still in the water, where there was quite a few other people walking down or driving down the ice with at the same time. And when they took my father and her right quick up to the house to get in warm, and my grandfather come run right down, and he had one of those running poles that I told you about to set nets. It was laying on the shore, and he ran out with the running pole, and he said, get a hold of that horse and tie a rope right around its neck. I think the rope was right on the end of the running pole.
Yeah.
And he said, and choke it right off so it can't breathe. And they did that, and he said, now he'll float up, we'll flop him up on the shore. And that's what they did. He floated up, and a bunch of men grabbed him by the harness and the legs and rolled him over up on the ice, and I don't know what they did with the sleigh. I guess it must have unhooked it and pulled it up later, likely. But anyway, the horse came up, and as soon as he got up on the ice, they untied him, and he started breathing, and so people was there, and they took him on down, put him in the barn down where my aunt lived. And next day, they rubbed him down good and put blankets over him to get him warm. Next day, he was fine. They took him out and worked him same as he did the day before.
All's well with the horse.
Always well with the horse. And my grandfather got this, when he was a young man, he went to Maine and worked in the woods in Maine. Up, and there was a lot of lakes they worked around. And he said that was a common thing for horses to go through the lake. And he seen them do it up there, where he got the idea that shut the wind off and get them to bloat, and then flop them up.
Well, there's a good tip. If your horse goes under, we can
That's right.
get him out of the ice.
Yeah. I don't know if you can do that with a man or not. Shut it.
Well, we'll just do it with horses.
We'll deal with the horses. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, Garnie.
Yeah.
We'll maybe back some other day for another lesson.
Well, I'd like to tell you, Richard, how much we got out of it, but I can't honestly tell you. But
well, it's something you did.
It was something we did and get paid for, and we got some cash. They mailed us a check, and
like a lot of things in New Brunswick, got you by.
Got us by. One of the things you could do to get by on. Yeah.